Living in Willowbrook Heights was supposed to be the American dream realized. Picture-perfect lawns, white picket fences, and neighbors who wave from their driveways while washing their pristine SUVs on Saturday mornings. For most of us, it was exactly that. But every Eden has its serpent, and ours came in the form of a 50-something woman named Karen Whitmore, who had somehow appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch commander, homeowners association, enforcer, and general pain in everyone's rear end. I'm Jake Morrison, 32 years old, software engineer, and proud owner of 1247 Maple Street, a modest two-story colonial with a backyard that had become my personal sanctuary. After years of apartment living and saving every penny, I'd finally scraped together enough for a down payment on my slice of suburbia. The house was perfect, except for one glaring omission: no pool. Growing up in Arizona, I'd practically lived in the water during those scorching summers, and the idea of owning a home without a pool felt like buying a car without wheels. So naturally, the first major renovation on my list was installing an above-ground pool. Nothing too fancy, just a decent-sized circular pool that would fit comfortably in my backyard without overwhelming the space. I'd done my research, pulled the proper permits, and even hired a licensed contractor to ensure everything was up to code. The installation took 3 days, and by the end of that weekend in late May, I was floating on my back, beer in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. That's when I first encountered the wrath of Karen Whitmore. Our properties shared a fence line, and Karen's house sat on a slight elevation that gave her a bird's-eye view of my entire backyard. I'd noticed her watching the installation process from her kitchen window, but I figured she was just curious about the construction noise. How naive I was. The first complaint came via a hand-delivered letter slipped under my front door at 6 a.m. sharp the Monday after my pool was completed. Written in Karen's precise schoolteacher handwriting on what appeared to be official HOA letterhead, though I later discovered she'd made it herself, the letter outlined 17 different violations my pool allegedly created. Dear Mr. Morrison, it has come to the attention of the Willowbrook Heights Community Standards Committee that your recent pool installation violates numerous community guidelines and local ordinances. The reflective surface creates a nuisance glare that penetrates neighboring properties. The filtration system operates at noise levels exceeding community quiet hours, 7 p.m. to 8 a.m. The chemical odor from chlorination drifts into adjacent yards, creating a health hazard for residents with respiratory sensitivities. Additionally, the pool's proximity to the shared fence line may compromise property values and violate setback requirements. The letter went on for 2 full pages, single-spaced, with subsections and numbered references to HOA bylaws that upon investigation either didn't exist or had been completely misinterpreted. At the bottom, Karen had signed it Karen Whitmore, Community Standards Chairwoman, a position that, as I later learned from actual HOA board members, she had created entirely in her own mind. I decided to take the diplomatic approach. That evening, I walked over to Karen's house with a bottle of wine and knocked on her front door. She answered wearing a floral house dress and an expression that could have curdled milk. Mrs. Whitmore? Hi, I'm Jake Morrison from next door. I got your letter about the pool, and I was hoping we could discuss your concerns. Karen's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Mr. Morrison, there's nothing to discuss. You've violated multiple community standards, and I expect immediate compliance with my recommendations. Well, I've actually checked with the city planning office and the HOA, and my pool meets all the requirements. I have all the permits and inspections if you'd like to see them. Your permits are clearly fraudulent or obtained through improper channels. No legitimate authority would approve such a monstrosity. I felt my diplomatic resolve beginning to crack. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand change can be unsettling, but I've followed all the proper procedures. Maybe we could find a compromise? I could install a privacy screen along the fence if the view bothers you. The view doesn't bother me, Mr. Morrison. What bothers me is your flagrant disregard for community standards and property values. That pool is an eyesore and a safety hazard, and I won't rest until it's removed. She slammed the door in my face before I could respond, leaving me standing on her porch holding a bottle of wine like an idiot. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen's campaign against my pool escalated dramatically. She started with what I came to call the documentation phase, standing at her kitchen window with a digital camera, photographing my backyard at all hours of the day and night. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and see the flash of her camera going off. She photographed me swimming. She photographed my friends when they came over for barbecues. She even photographed my golden retriever, Max, when he went out for his evening bathroom break. Next came the complaint phase. Karen filed formal complaints with every municipal department she could find. The health department received reports about standing water breeding mosquitoes and creating vector-borne disease risks. The fire department was contacted about illegal electrical installations creating fire hazards. The police were called about excessive noise violations during quiet hours and possible illegal dumping of chemicals into storm drains. Each complaint triggered an official investigation. My doorbell rang constantly as various inspectors, officers, and municipal employees arrived to examine my pool setup. Without exception, they found no violations whatsoever. The health inspector actually complimented me on my water maintenance. The fire marshal praised my GFCI electrical setup. The police officer who responded to the noise complaint arrived during one of my pool parties and ended up staying for a burger and a beer. But Karen wasn't deterred by these setbacks. If anything, they seemed to fuel her determination. She started the social media phase, creating a Facebook group called Concerned Citizens of Willowbrook Heights, where she posted daily updates about the pool situation next door. Her posts read like dispatches from a war zone. Day 23 of the pool crisis. The perpetrator continues to use his illegal installation despite multiple warnings. Today he had the audacity to inflate a pool float shaped like a flamingo. The pink monstrosity is clearly visible from 17 different properties and represents a deliberate act of neighborhood harassment. When will the authorities take action? Most of our neighbors ignored Karen's social media crusade, but she did manage to recruit a small army of like-minded busybodies who began driving by my house to take pictures and leaving nasty notes on my car. Mrs. Henderson from 3 streets over started a petition to have my pool removed. Mr. Jameson began timing my pool pump cycles and filing noise complaints based on his scientific measurements taken with a phone app. The situation reached peak absurdity during what I now refer to as the Great Pool Party of July 4th. I'd invited about 20 friends and family members over for a traditional Independence Day celebration. We had burgers on the grill, cold, beer in coolers, and a playlist of classic rock floating across the water. Everyone was having a great time. Kids splashing in the shallow end, adults floating on rafts with drinks in hand, and my elderly neighbor, Mr. Patterson, who lived on the other side and had become an unlikely ally, regaling everyone with stories from his Navy days. That's when Karen made her grand entrance. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with my college roommate Dave, when I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's voice cutting through the music and laughter like a rusty knife through silk. "This is absolutely unacceptable. You people are disturbing the entire neighborhood." I turned around to see Karen standing in my backyard, having apparently let herself through my side gate. She was wearing a white tennis outfit with matching visor and carrying a clipboard thick with what appeared to be legal documents. Her face was flushed red with righteous indignation, and she was pointing accusingly at my guests like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "Ma'am, this is private property," I said, setting down my spatula and walking toward her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I most certainly will not leave. You're violating at least 12 municipal ordinances, and I have photographic evidence." She held up her phone, snapping pictures of my guests, my grill, and my pool setup. "Excessive noise, public nuisance, possible liquor violations, unsafe swimming conditions, and environmental contamination." My friend Sarah, a lawyer who'd driven up from the city for the party, stepped forward with an amused expression. "Environmental contamination? Lady, it's a pool party, not a toxic waste dump." Karen whirled on her like a heat-seeking missile. "Don't you dare minimize this situation. The chemical runoff from that pool is contaminating the groundwater and killing indigenous plant species. The only thing getting killed here is the mood," Dave muttered, earning chuckles from several guests. Karen's face grew even redder. This is exactly the kind of attitude that's destroying our community. No respect for property values, no consideration for neighbors, no regard for basic decency. That's when 8-year-old Emma, my niece, tugged. The week following my 4th of July pool party was eerily quiet. Karen's house remained still, her kitchen window blinds drawn tight, and for the first time in months, I didn't see her lurking behind her fence or photographing my backyard activities. I should have known she was planning something big. The calm shattered the following Saturday morning at exactly 7:23 a.m. when 3 police cruisers, a fire truck, and an ambulance came screaming down Maple Street with sirens wailing and lights flashing. I stumbled out of bed in my pajamas, heart pounding, convinced there had been a terrible accident. Instead, I found the entire emergency response team gathered in front of my house, with Karen standing on my front lawn gesticulating wildly at my backyard pool. "There!" she was shouting at Officer Martinez, the same cop who'd enjoyed burgers at my pool party. "You can see the evidence clearly. The water is completely black, obviously contaminated with toxic chemicals or biological waste." Officer Martinez looked deeply uncomfortable as he recognized me approaching in my bathrobe. "Mr. Morrison, we received a report of possible hazardous material contamination at your residence. The caller claimed your pool water had turned black overnight and was emitting dangerous fumes." I rubbed my eyes and looked toward my backyard, where my pool sat exactly as I'd left it the night before. Crystal clear blue water sparkling in the morning sun. "Officer, my pool is fine. The water's perfectly normal." "That's impossible," Karen shrieked. "I have photographic evidence. Look." She thrust her phone toward the officer, showing him what appeared to be a photo of dark, murky water. "Officer?" Martinez studied the photo, then looked at my obviously pristine pool, then back at Karen with an expression of dawning realization. "Ma'am, this appears to be a photograph of a different body of water entirely, possibly a pond or retention basin." "It most certainly is not. That criminal has somehow covered up the contamination, probably drained the toxic water during the night and refilled it to hide the evidence." The fire chief, a burly man named Captain Rodriguez, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've responded to 6 calls from this address in the past month. Each time our investigation has found no violations or safety hazards. Filing false emergency reports is a serious offense." Karen's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a particularly vibrant shade of crimson. "False reports? False reports? I am a concerned citizen trying to protect this neighborhood from environmental terrorism." "Environmental terrorism?" I couldn't help myself. "Karen, it's an above-ground pool with standard chlorine treatment. I bought the chemicals at Home Depot, not from some back-alley arms dealer." The paramedic, a young woman who'd been checking her equipment with obvious boredom, looked up. "Did someone actually report medical symptoms from chemical exposure?" "I have been experiencing severe respiratory distress," Karen announced dramatically. "Constant coughing, burning eyes, throat irritation, all clearly caused by the toxic fumes from that death trap." "Have you seen a doctor about these symptoms?" the paramedic asked professionally. "I don't need a doctor to tell me I'm being poisoned by my neighbor." Officer Martinez closed his notepad with a decisive snap. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while we complete our investigation, and I strongly advise you to think carefully before making any more emergency calls about this property." As the emergency responders reluctantly went through the motions of inspecting my perfectly normal pool, I noticed several neighbors had gathered on the street to watch the spectacle. Mrs. Chen from across the street was shaking her head in disapproval at Karen, not me. The Johnsons were openly laughing. Even old Mr. Hendricks, who usually kept to himself, was standing on his porch with his arms crossed, glaring at Karen with unconcealed disgust. After 20 minutes of testing my pool water, checking my equipment and finding absolutely nothing wrong, the emergency responders began packing up their gear. Captain Rodriguez approached Karen one final time. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you continue to file false emergency reports, you will be cited for misuse of emergency services. Do you understand?" Karen's response was to turn on her, heel and march back to her house, slamming her front door so hard that I heard something break inside. That afternoon, I decided it was time for a neighborhood meeting. I sent out a group text to everyone on Maple Street, inviting them over for what I diplomatically called a community discussion. By 6 o'clock, nearly 20 neighbors had gathered in my backyard, ranging from young families to retirees, all united by their frustration with Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior. "Look, I get it," said Mike Johnson, a contractor who lived 4 houses down. "Nobody wants a bad neighbor, but this lady has lost her mind. She's called the city about my work truck being parked in my own driveway. Apparently, it's lowering property values. She reported my garden gnomes as a safety hazard," added Mrs. Chen. "Claimed they were trip hazards that could attract lawsuits. They're 8 inches tall and sitting in my flower bed," phrase. Poured out as neighbors shared their own Karen encounters. She'd filed complaints about children's chalk drawings on sidewalks, reported decorative wind chimes as noise violations, and even called animal control because Mr. Patterson's elderly cat was roaming unsupervised and threatening local wildlife. "The woman has become a neighborhood terrorist," declared Sarah Wilson, a nurse who lived at the end of the street. "My 12-year-old daughter is afraid to ride her bike past Karen's house because she always comes out screaming about reckless endangerment of pedestrians." That's when Mr. Patterson, who'd been quietly listening while sipping a beer, spoke, up with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "You know, Jake, I think it's time we gave Karen something real to complain about." "What do you mean?" The old Navy veteran grinned. "Well, she's been going on and on about how dangerous your pool is, right? How it's a safety hazard and a threat to the neighborhood. Maybe it's time we made her fears come true." "I'm not following." "My grandson Tommy works for a company that makes props for movies and TV shows. They've got everything: fake blood, monster costumes, special effects equipment. What if your pool actually did become dangerous? What if there was a real threat lurking in those waters?" The idea hit me like lightning. I'm talking about giving Willowbrook Heights its very own Jaws experience. Karen wants to see a safety hazard? Let's show her a safety hazard she'll never forget." The planning took 2 weeks, and it required the coordination of half the neighborhood. Mr. Patterson's grandson Tommy was indeed a prop master for a local film studio, and when we explained the situation, he was more than happy to help us teach Karen a lesson. The plan was beautifully simple. We were going to put a shark in my pool, not a real shark, obviously. Tommy had access to an incredibly realistic mechanical shark that had been used in a low-budget horror movie the previous year. The thing was 8 feet long, made of high-grade silicone and latex, with articulated jaws and a motorized tail that could create convincing swimming motions. More importantly, it was designed to be partially submerged, with just the dorsal fin and occasional glimpses of its body visible from the surface, exactly like a real shark stalking its prey. But the shark was only part of the plan. We needed Karen to see it at exactly the right moment, under exactly the right circumstances. That's where the neighborhood network came in. Mrs. Chen, who had a clear view of Karen's kitchen window, would serve as our lookout. Mike Johnson would handle the technical setup, installing underwater LED lights that could create an ominous glow beneath the surface. Sarah Wilson would provide fake blood capsules that would dissolve in water, creating realistic-looking feeding scenes. And Mr. Patterson would coordinate the timing with military precision. The plan went into effect on a Thursday evening in Suppy Aoi, late July. I'd been careful to establish a routine over the previous weeks. Every Thursday at 7 p.m., I would swim laps in my pool for exactly 30 minutes. Karen had photographed this routine obsessively, so I knew she'd be watching. At 6:45 p.m., I received the text from Mrs. Chen. "Eagle is in the nest. Kitchen window, camera ready." I slipped into my swimming trunks and walked out to the pool, making a show of testing the water temperature and adjusting the pool lights. Hidden beneath the surface, secured to the bottom with weights and controlled by a waterproof remote, the mechanical shark waited in the deep end. I dove in and began my usual routine, swimming slow, steady laps while Mike Johnson monitored Karen's position from his backyard. After 15 minutes of normal swimming, I got the signal. "Now," Mike whispered from his hiding spot behind my garden shed. I activated the shark. The effect was incredible. The mechanical beast rose from the depths like something out of a nightmare, its dorsal fin cutting through the water with predatory grace. The underwater LED lights created an eerie blue-green glow that made the shark's silhouette clearly visible from above. As it moved through the water with disturbingly realistic swimming motions, I began my performance. First, I pretended not to notice the shark, continuing my laps while the mechanical beast circled behind me. Then, as it approached, I suddenly stopped swimming and looked around with obvious confusion and growing alarm. "What the hell?" I shouted loud and